Hello friends, welcome back to Zhengguan Dian. I'm Zheng Fei. Today there's major news. The Strait of Hormuz has reopened. This is the first time the Strait of Hormuz has been fully and truly open since the outbreak of war on the 28th of February. Early this morning, Trump made the official announcement on Truth Social. You can tell he's absolutely delighted, saying that today is a brilliant and great day for the whole world. At the same time, the Iranian side has also confirmed that in accordance with the Lebanon ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz has been declared fully open to all commercial vessels, and this will continue until the ceasefire period ends. With such good news, what about us? Of course we must raise a glass and celebrate together, so I'm quickly putting out an extra episode. And I'd like to ask you all for a small favour. Right now, please give me a like and let's have a round of applause in the comments section. Every bit of interaction from you helps me spread my voice further, letting more people know about my programme. Many thanks to all of you in advance. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz couldn't have happened without Trump personally stepping in. Senator Lindsey Graham revealed in an interview that Trump himself was negotiating directly with the Iranians, and the talks were quite intense. He shouted so much that he ended up losing his voice.
Our man is speaking directly to the Iranians. He's negotiating in person. He was on the phone with the Iranians a couple of days ago, and things got rather heated. To the extent that President Trump loudly warned Iran about what would happen if they kept playing games, he actually lost his voice. I wouldn't want to be the Iranian on the other end of that call. So President Trump is now directly involved in the negotiations.
That last line was brilliant. I really wouldn't want to be the Iranian answering that call. After Trump announced that the strait was completely open, he immediately posted another message saying that the US military blockade of Iranian ports would remain fully in effect until the deal between both sides was 100% complete. He said the process should be quick, as most of the key points of the agreement with Iran had already been settled. Now, the specific details of this agreement are still unclear, but it's said that it includes a deal worth $20 billion. The United States is offering Iran $20 billion in exchange for Iran reducing its stockpile of enriched uranium and, moreover, to bring an end to the war. According to today's exclusive report, the US and Iran are negotiating a 3-page memorandum, the key clause of which is that Iran will hand over nearly 2,000 kilograms of enriched uranium stockpile and the US will unfreeze $200 billion of Iranian assets. Initially, Iran was asking for $27 billion, while the United States' initial offer was $6 billion. Now the figure being discussed is $20 billion. Bear in mind, this $20 billion is originally Iran's own money. It's Iranian assets that have been frozen by the US, not money the US has taken out of its own pocket to give to Iran. Trump posted to clarify that there would be no cash exchange. However, Azile quoted 2 US officials confirming that the unfreezing of assets is indeed one of the topics under negotiation. In addition, the suspension period for enriched uranium is also under negotiation. The US side is demanding 20 years, while Iran is bargaining for 5 years, so both sides are still locked in a tug-of-war over this issue. Trump said that the second round of face-to-face talks might take place in Islamabad this weekend. Therefore, we expect that it won't be long before we see a historic agreement that will attract the world's attention. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is already quite a significant breakthrough. Iran has completely capitulated, once again proving that Trump's Venezuela-style economic blockade, combined with military airstrikes, is an effective double-pronged strategy. Previously, we predicted that Iran wouldn't be able to hold out for long, but we didn't expect it to happen quite this quickly. In that episode, we analysed Trump's strategy of blockading the strait in detail. If you missed it, feel free to go back and watch it. We won't repeat it here. After the news broke, the markets were jubilant today. Oil prices fell in response, with Brent crude dropping from nearly $100 a barrel down to $89, a fall of over 10%. US stock futures surged across the board. Just as everyone was revelling in this good news, European countries expressed that they too wanted to join the party and have some fun. The UK and France made a high-profile announcement that they would launch an independent mission to protect freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Italian Prime Minister Meloni also promptly stated that Italy would send naval forces to take part. However, Trump quickly shot them down, leaving them utterly humiliated. Trump said that after the issue in the Strait of Hormuz was resolved, NATO called him and asked, "Hey, is there anything we can help with?" Trump was not polite at all. To put his words another way, why are you lot pretending to be the good guys now? Where were you earlier? When we really needed help, you were nowhere to be seen. Now the strait's open and oil prices have dropped, you lot just want to swoop in and take advantage. NATO is nothing but a complete paper tiger. Speaking of NATO, now that the Iran wars draw into a close, the next major event we can foresee is whether the United States will ultimately withdraw from NATO. NATO has experienced 3 near-death crises in its 77-year history, and this time is probably the biggest yet. Tomorrow we'll be discussing this topic, so friends, remember to subscribe and join us at the same time tomorrow as we debate this issue on contending views. As for the real-time traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, it has already begun to slowly recover from its previous near-complete standstill. According to the latest data from several ship tracking platforms, around 8 to 12 vessels have passed through the strait in the past 24 hours. This volume is still extremely low because although the strait is now fully open, Iran requires ships to pass through Iranian ports and follow the routes designated by its maritime organisation, while the US military blockade of Iranian ports remains in effect. The US military is still broadcasting warnings and intercepting ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. However, it is believed that this is merely a transitional state for the next few days. There should be little doubt that the Strait of Hormuz will soon return to its previous high throughput. Against the backdrop of all merchant vessels gradually resuming navigation and the Strait of Hormuz finally beginning to ease, there is one ship whose story is the most dramatic and the most compelling. It is the Fuxing cruise ship, which has already set the Chinese internet abuzz for several days. Over the past 3 or 4 days, from trending topics on Weibo to Bilibili, Zhihu and various major self-media accounts, the Chinese internet has exploded with a feel-good story that has stirred the blood of almost everyone in China. The story goes that a Chinese cruise ship swaggered straight through the Hormuz Strait, brazenly ignoring the blockade set up by 16 US warships. And as for the US military, 16 warships and over 10,000 troops didn't even dare to try and stop it. Then, alongside the Chinese Navy's Type 054A frigate, 4 Chinese supertankers also appeared, all passing through under the escort of the warship. The US military couldn't do a thing, just stood there watching, powerless. It sounds absolutely exhilarating and uplifting, but is it really true? Friends, next up is the second main highlight of today's programme, and it's truly fascinating. If you watch until the end, you'll be absolutely gobsmacked, so make sure you stick with me right to the finish. What's really going on with this sensational story? What's the actual situation? Let's first take a look at what kind of incident this is on the Chinese internet. To start with the background, on the 13th of April 2026, US President Trump ordered the US Navy to blockade all ships entering and leaving Iranian ports because negotiations between the US and Iran had broken down. So in a fit of anger, Trump said, "If you, Iran, refuse to open up the Strait of Hormuz, then I'll impose a counter-blockade." More than 10,000 American troops and over a dozen warships. Dozens of fighter jets lined up in formation in the Strait of Hormuz. And then, this is where the narrative on the Chinese internet began. Listen carefully, everyone. The first act is called "The Rejuvenation Sets Out to Break Through." In the early hours of the 14th of April, a cruise ship named Rejuvenation, flying the flag of Malawi but actually owned by Shanghai Shanren Shipping Company, set off. Furthermore, around 250,000 barrels of methanol quietly sailed into the Strait of Hormuz under the heavy blockade of the US military. This ship had long been on the US sanctions list and all the crew on board were Chinese. The US military clearly saw it but didn't dare to intercept it. On Bilibili, a related video showing a Chinese cruise ship ignoring the US blockade and passing through the Strait of Hormuz has racked up over 500,000 views, with more than 600 comments, all saying things like, "Wow, that's incredible, China is mighty, and the US military is just a paper tiger." In a highly upvoted answer on Zhihu, such sentences are written in even greater detail. The US military deployed 16 warships, yet didn't dare to stop even a single oil tanker. Isn't this just telling the whole world that their blockade is nothing but for show? On NetEase, there's a self-media article titled "Chinese Cruise Ship Dominates, Breaks Through US Blockade," which rushes to defenders, and the article discusses the US military's response. They hurriedly tried to make excuses, saying that the Fuxing departed from a port in the UAE, not from an Iranian port. Therefore, it wasn't within the scope of the US military's blockade, and then they openly mocked the United States. This sort of explanation just means that when you're strong enough, others will naturally come up with all sorts of arguments on your behalf. The implication is that because this is a Chinese cruise ship and China is strong enough, the US, well, ends up making excuses for itself. I know that some of you are probably itching to start having a go at this point, but hang on a moment, just hold your horses, because the really exciting part is still to come. It hasn't arrived yet. The second act is called 054A Backs Up. The Chinese Navy's Type 054A frigate Deqing, with the hull number 576, quietly appeared on the western side of the Strait of Hormuz. This piece of news spread rapidly across the Chinese circles on Weibo and the X platform, with all sorts of military bloggers starting to analyse it in detail. The Deqing is equipped with Ye-19 hypersonic anti-ship missiles capable of destroying various large American warships from outside the US military's defensive perimeter. From this, it can be concluded that the presence of a large vessel here is no coincidence. It is specifically here to escort and protect the Chinese cruise ship. The third act is titled The Triumphant Return of the Four Great Cruise Ships, with the Partridge leading the way. The post lists in detail the names of these four Chinese super cruise ships: COSCO Zhufeng, Heilong, Haijinhua and Haijiyong Bonanza. The post states that these four cruise ships kept their AIS signals on throughout the journey and sailed according to their original routes. Under the protection of the 054 Alpha Daking warship on the high seas, they passed through the Strait of Hormuz without any hindrance. The US military deployed 15 warships and an aircraft carrier, but throughout the entire process they only dared to watch and did not attempt to stop a single one. You see, when you put these three acts together, it forms a perfect story of inevitable Chinese victory. From Chinese cruise ships testing the waters of the Strait, to the appearance of a PLA escort ship providing backing, and finally the cruise ships passing smoothly through the whole area, while the US military could do nothing but watch helplessly, not daring to intervene. The protagonist is China, the antagonist is the United States, and the ending is the US losing face while China wins hands down. Oh, this story has suspense, twists, a climax and applause. From a communications perspective, it's exactly the sort of thing that's bound to go viral. It's become a feel-good story for everyone, but the problem is, with our years of experience in opposing the CCP and our keen insight into their usual style, we can tell there's something fishy about this story before it's even finished. So just how much of it is exaggerated? Did the Fuxing really pass through the Strait of Hormuz? According to real-time data from the international ship tracking platform Vessel Finder, at least up to now, with the strait fully open, as of the time I'm recording this programme, the Fuxing is still in the Persian Gulf. Its speed is 0.1 knots, which is basically stationary, anchored near the Iranian coast. Its status is shown as awaiting orders, which means it hasn't actually gone anywhere at all. So what's really going on with this sensational story about the Fuxing? What is the actual situation? On 13th April, the very day the US military blockade was launched, the Fuxing made its first attempt to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but when it got near Kesham Island, it turned back. It didn't make it through, tried to go but gave up on its own. On 14th April, it made a second attempt and did indeed head towards the Gulf of Oman. Both Bloomberg and Reuters reported this. It loaded methanol at Hamria port in the UAE, with its destination listed as China. Because it didn't depart directly from an Iranian port, strictly speaking, the blockade rules. That is, they only apply to vessels entering or leaving Iranian ports, so technically they don't apply to it. But what comes next is the key point. Although the US military's blockade rules didn't apply to it, the Fuxing still wasn't able to get out. On 15th April, the Fuxing turned around in the Gulf of Oman. AIS tracking data from the British maritime analysis company Polestar Global clearly shows that this vessel suddenly changed course in the Gulf of Oman. It turned around and headed back towards the Strait of Hormuz. The specialist maritime media outlet Sea Trade Maritime directly characterised the incident in its report. This is a sanctioned cruise ship in the Strait of Hormuz held back due to the US military's blockade and was forced to turn back. Martin Kelly commented that the US blockade appears to be effective, so the reality is that although the Fuxing did pass through the strait, it later turned back. The return journey is the key point here. and the Fuxing's return precisely demonstrates the actual effectiveness of the US military's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The US Central Command released a recording from VHF Channel 16, which was a broadcast from a US warship to vessels in the strait. The gist of the message was that the United States had officially announced a blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas, and that all vessels should immediately return to port. Ships should not attempt to break the blockade by heading to or departing from Iranian ports. Any vessels will be subject to boarding and inspection or even seizure. All ships must turn back or prepare to undergo inspection. If you do not comply, we will use force. In this video segment, you can more or less see what's happening in the footage. Let's take a look at this video.
Who's that for? This is US Navy warship 115, requesting that you return to your original port of call in Iran. Do you copy? Over. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Copy that, sir. I am altering course to Iran. Thank you. We acknowledge. This is US warship 115. I understand you will return to your previous port of call in Iran. This is US warship 115, standing by on channel 16. Out.
So that's the reason for the resurgence turning back. In the briefing from US Central Command on 15th April, it was also made very clear 10 ships were ordered to turn around, and not a single one successfully broke through the blockade, which once again indirectly explains the resurgence's turning back. On 16th April, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan King, further clarified at a Pentagon press conference that 13 ships had already been intercepted and that the US military's blockade was completely effective. So the reality is that the resurgence, this Chinese oil tanker under sanctions, attempted twice to cross the strait during the US military's full blockade of the Hormuz. The first attempt failed, and on the second attempt it briefly passed through the strait, but was intercepted by the US military and forced to turn back. The next day it turned around and headed back. In the end, it is still anchored in the Persian Gulf, unable to go anywhere, having failed to reach any destination. This is worlds apart from the propaganda on the Chinese mainland, which claimed the tanker boldly broke through and that the US military didn't dare to stop it. Let's talk about the issue of the Type 054A frigate Daqing. This warship was indeed operating in the relevant area at that time. The Chinese Navy maintains a regular escort fleet in the Gulf of Aden, and the Daqing is part of that. However, not a single mainstream English-language media outlet directly linked the Daqing to the Fuxing tanker, not a single one. The claim that the Type 054A frigate was specially deployed to escort 4 Chinese oil tankers comes entirely from Chinese social media. There is no evidence for this in international media or publicly available tracking data. As for those 4 so-called supertankers that supposedly passed through the strait unimpeded under the protection of the Type 054A frigate, they too exist only in posts on Chinese platforms. This piece of news is, in fact, completely false, so this case actually provides a very clear demonstration of the Chinese Communist Party's modus operandi in information warfare. Firstly, it is based on a real event. The Fuxing indeed did attempt to pass through the strait. This is true, it did briefly pass through the Hormuz Strait. Then they selectively edit the entire incident, only mentioning the part where it passed through, without talking about the subsequent interception and forced return by the US military. They only say that the US military failed to stop it, omitting the part where the Fuxing was forced to turn back after crossing the strait. Then they amplify it with emotional exaggeration, saying things like 16 US warships confronting a single Chinese oil tanker, or that the US military didn't dare to intercept it, calling it a victory for national dignity. In the end, they even weave in unrelated details about the 054A frigate into the whole storyline, fabricate details about 4 supertankers passing through, and add a dose of excitement, turning a simple shipping incident into a national hero story that sends the adrenaline of uninformed Chinese people soaring. In fact, the real situation is worlds apart from what he describes. Sometimes I wonder if ordinary Chinese people could freely access information from the West, open up these real-time tracking websites and see for themselves the current location of the Fuxing, then those people on Weibo who are shouting that the US military is nothing but a paper tiger, how would they actually feel? But it's a real shame that they can't see it. They're trapped in a carefully constructed information cocoon, and all they ever see are these so-called feel-good stories, meticulously fabricated by the Chinese Communist Party. unless Chinese people are able to bypass the firewall. But right now, fewer than 0.5% of people in China are able to access foreign websites. I'd like to recommend a project to my friends, which consists of two parts. One is a website curated by myself and many other independent media figures and overseas media outlets. On this website, you'll find all the real information that Chinese people need to know, but which they simply can't access within China. The other part is a technical team called One-Click Bypass. They use special technology to send that website to platforms inside the Great Firewall, such as WeChat and other social media platforms. Friends inside the firewall only need to click on a link to access the overseas website, and the user experience is just like visiting a domestic website. There's no need for a VPN, no technical know-how required, and absolutely no need to install any software. This technology has actually already been used by a large number of people inside China, and it has been confirmed to work. However, those who are familiar with IT and circumvention technologies will certainly know that running such an operation is extremely expensive, especially when people inside China want to watch my videos or other media files. It becomes even more costly. So here, I would like to sincerely invite every overseas Chinese friend who is watching this program to join me in doing this. If you have some spare money and recognise the value of this cause, I hope you can support this project. For every $2,000 we raise, we can generate around 100 circumvention links. And these links, they'll be randomly distributed to platforms inside China for Chinese people to use free of charge, no matter how much is donated. It is all a token of our goodwill. In such a time of historic change, as descendants of China, I believe this is the most meaningful thing we can do for our compatriots living in mainland China, especially those who are most helpless. It is truly an act of immense merit. So I have pinned the donation link at the top of the comment section. If you have any questions, you can email me at zengguandian@gmail.com. Thank you very much for your support, everyone. Finally, I would like to ask you all a question. Please tell me quietly, what was your very first reaction when you first heard the narrative from mainland China about the successful breakthrough of the revival? If you thought it must be fake and didn't believe it at all, type 1. If you found it a bit novel and were a bit sceptical but weren't sure whether it was true or not, type 2. If you thought, wow, that's absolutely brilliant, and instinctively believed it was true, type 3. Friends, let me know in the comments section. Let's see what our viewers' first reactions are to this kind of narrative. Alright then, we'll leave it here for today. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the 3 near-death crises NATO faced in its 77-year history, which I've been teasing for a while. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to come back to True Perspective at the same time tomorrow. See you then, bye bye!